We met at a meeting, and it's kind of when you meet somebody that you go, hey, you're different than some of these other guys. And met Brent and had an opportunity to get to know him a little bit. One of the first things that struck me about Brent was huge heart for the Lord. I mean, he was not shy about letting people know where he stood with his faith, and I really admired that. And then years later, we've reconnected and had a chance to work on a couple of things, which he'll tell you more about. But Brent is a seasoned leader in philanthropy. He's got over 37 years of experience in ministry, finance, insurance, and fundraising. How about that for a variety of things? Brent's passion for ministry began when he was in high school. He's from the Valley. He grew up here in the Valley, kind of a farm kid. He served in churches, he served in business, and he served in ministry for nearly 4 decades, which is pretty amazing because he's only 30 years old. So it's pretty amazing how that works. So throughout his career, Brent's partnered with thriving businesses, families, professional advisors, and he's helped various foundations deploy over $70 million into ministries locally. So he's really got a heart for generosity, which is why we're going to be talking about generosity. And lastly, in 2017, Brent joined forces to launch the 10 Talents Foundation for the Central Valley region. And in 2020, after serving for Convoy of Hope for a number of years, and he'll tell you a little bit more about the story, he began building the 10 Talents Foundation and also does some consulting. Sorry about that. So, lastly, Brent's been married for 30 years, has 3 daughters. His hobbies include woodworking, gardening, handiwork, and mentoring leaders in development. So, with that, we're going to welcome Brent Riffle up front.
Thanks, Dan, for making half that stuff up. That's always nice. Now I can tell the truth, right? So, are you gonna? Okay. So I remember as a kid, my parents out in Sanger. When we were, I should stand in front of this. When I was growing up in Sanger, I remember my parents taking me over to my grandparents' house. And my grandparents lived on the Sanger river bottom area. Their house was on top of the bluff. Their name's Alan Noni Riffle. And I remember as a kid, 10 years old, heading over there in our 1971 olive green Impala, 2-door, really sexy car, and heading over to my grandparents' house, arriving and never really knowing who's going to be there. They always had guests over. They always had people over, and so with that, they loved connecting with people and loving people. And I remember getting there, and their place was super green, was beautiful. Off to the edge, you could see the lines of trees all along the edge of the Kings River, and just a beautiful place. So in growing up, though, they were super generous. They loved connecting with people. And at that time in 1977, World Impact started here in Fresno. I don't know how many of you would remember that, but the thing that was interesting to me was that World Impact kids and staff were always at my grandparents' house. Seemed like every time I went over there, it's like World Impact's here. And I don't know if it had something to do with the First Pres Church here, or if it was Sanger Press, but they always had this love for people. I know, yeah, that's Dan's other joke. All right. But they always had a love for people. Color didn't matter to them. Ethnicity didn't matter to them. but they always had this heart of compassion for seeing people love Jesus. And that was so much the joy of heading over there. You know, they didn't put in a big, huge swimming pool for us as grandkids. It was always for the inner city kids that never had a pool, or that didn't know what it looked like to have fun swimming in a swimming pool, because back then in those days, that was pretty rare. People would have swimming pools in Fresno. And so I just remember those times. I remember the weekends picking fruits and vegetables. I should say fruit and vegetables with Grandpa on the farm and delivering them on Sunday mornings to Sanger Press, all to just give it away. It was his opportunity to talk to people about Jesus. It was his opportunity to invest in ministry, in missions, and in people in need. My parents had the same heart. We always had people over. We were always investing in different people. And so at an early age, I was face to face with the love of Jesus and the love that he expressed to others. In 2 Corinthians 9, you may want to read that through a few times because it's the heart of generosity. And I'm just going to share a few pieces of that. It says, "Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give in your heart what you decided to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." My grandparents didn't build that pool for any of us, but it was always a tool for evangelism. It was in those years that my mom had a conversation with me when I was 7 years old, and in front of that green Impala, I remember standing there, and I would tally in the ground the times that I would ask Jesus to become a part of my life, because at that time, I just really didn't know if he heard me. And I said, Jesus, come into my life, and I would put a tally in the ground. Jesus, come into my life. I'd put another tally. Jesus, come into my life. I said it 100 times. I had 100 tallies sitting on the ground. I guess I knew how to count then, which was good. But I remember just going, I want Jesus to know that he can hear me. I want him to know. And it was at 7 that I accepted Christ for the first time. We moved to Kerman when I was in 3rd grade and lived on a ranch near a group of homes with other families who were from Mexico. So again, it didn't matter who someone was for us as a family. We welcomed them into our home, and we had a great time spending time with different people. I remember in 3rd grade dressing up for Halloween. Where were we going to go? We were 10 miles west of Kerman, 2 miles off the nearest road, and we're sitting in the middle of the fields of 2,000 acres on this ranch. And where would we go trick-or-treating? My brother and I would put on our mop wigs, when those, crazy, hairy, furry mops, and that would be some of our dress up, and we would head over, and I would get in the car, because I knew how to drive when I was super young, and I would get in our car, barely looking over the steering wheel, and drive to our neighbor's house and do trick-or-treating over there. They would welcome us in, and they would just hand us tons of candy, and we would just sit there and eat and just have a great time together. It was all about giving. It was giving to each other. It was giving to other people, but it was always kind of wrapped around a heart of generosity. In 4th grade, I met a girl at Kerman Covenant Church, Lorenda Sieperda, whose family came up from a dairy in Chino to start another dairy in Kerman. The farm life continued. Our family moved to Kingsburg after that, and managed another farming operation, and I entered Kingsburg schools with one friend who I didn't know because he was a relative of the guy that owned the ranch out in Kerman, and they lived in Kingsburg. I eventually began working with his family, and it was the David Jackson family out of Kingsburg. And all the connections that we started making in Kingsburg. Eventually started working for George Jackson out in one of the packing sheds. Working with amazing people that had a heart for the Lord. I so appreciated that growing up because those folks always welcomed us into their home. They always had food. We'd always go rob the refrigerators. And watching those families make a transformational impact in the lives of others was just something really cool to watch. Whether it be connecting with people over at one of their homes, with ministries from all over the country, coming in and being there. But it was always about generosity and kingdom impact. I remember when they started funding the Jesus films back in the day. All other ministries, Fresno Mission. It was funny, one of them made a gift to the Fresno Mission when I was on staff there, and everybody was kind of making a joke going, this is a $450 gift. And I said, don't worry. The Lord's going to do some great things. Good things take time. They take time to build. It was not too long after that another $250,000 check came that was next. And you just go, Lord, you're good. It was my sophomore year in high school at Easter break that I went on my first mission trip to Mexico. And I'll tell you, that trip wrecked me. I thought I knew poverty. I thought I knew what poverty looked like. But spending time there, I got to see what poverty really looked like. It was in 1985 that I recommitted my life to Christ and was baptized in the Kings River on Easter morning at sunrise service on April 7th, 1985. Now, I had to do a Google search to figure out what Easter Sunday looked like back in 1985, but it was on April 7th that I discovered that with my best friend, Brad Johnson from Kingsburg. He and I became partners in ministry. We went through a discipleship program with our youth pastor, Gary Sander, who made a significant impact in our lives. And later on, it was he and I doing ministry with Young Life and Wildlife, working in youth ministries and junior high and high school ministries, in leadership, and then eventually leading some of the outreach project pieces in Mexico. So what did Mexico do to my heart? I saw real poverty for the first time. It showed me what real faith looks like. Yes, we all see poverty around us in our region, but do we really feel it? We don't feel the day-to-day pressure. We don't see the refrigerators empty. We typically don't see a half a bag of rice, which is all people have. I remember that from being in El Salvador, because that little half bag of rice was all they had. We typically don't pray for our bicycle tire to remain filled with air so we can get to work. We usually ask someone else for a ride to go and get our car fixed, or we take Uber. And we don't have to worry typically about what's in our account. We pay the bill and we go on our way. It showed me that showed me what broken down shoes look like. It showed me what no shoes at all look like. And it showed me that people don't put ceiling fans in churches. Why? In some of these poor countries, because they'll never be able to afford the power to run them. what it really showed me is that compassion and what compassion and generosity looks like from the heart of the poor. I don't know that I've been so loved by people that are poor because they're so grateful for everything they have. There were times where people would welcome me into their homes and give me their last bit of filtered water while they drank the only thing that they have left, which was their unfiltered water. And in some of the countries, that was pretty disgusting. I saw pastors working in the streets, selling food to provide for their families, to work extra hard for a month or two in order to serve one meal to a group of 30 hungry American kids on a mission trip. Why the generosity? Why the compassion? Because in trials, we are to consider it joy, James 1:2 would say. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, God loves a cheerful giver, like I said. And in verse 8, it says, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound. You will abound in every good work. They are generous and love out of their compassion and their love for God. Knowing that He will provide, knowing that out of Christ-centered humility through generosity comes blessings. A couple months after I returned home from our third time in Mexico, it was 2 months after we returned home, and I was working at my neighbor's house. I was always working. There was always things that I was doing. Whether it be working for the Jacksons or working for my neighbor, working for my other neighbor, I was always a hard worker. My dad had always coached me to work hard, to love Jesus, and to love people. And so I would always work hard. And so this one day I was across the road in front of our house as we lived in Kingsburg, and I was working at my neighbor's house, and it was a Saturday morning, and I get home. Actually, I'm working, and I look across the street, and my dad comes home, and I'm like, well, that's interesting because he never typically doesn't come home at 9:30 in the morning. I was already over there at 6, but he came home at 9:30, and I couldn't understand why. So I went across the yard, and I was like, hey, Dad, what's going on? What's happening? And it was that day that he said, has Mom talked to you? I said, no. What's going on? And he goes, she didn't talk to you? And I said, no. He goes, well, things aren't going well. And I'm moving out today. I knew nothing. That was a hard moment. Why? Because that comment to us as a Christian family sent shockwaves and ripples through Sanger, through Kerman, through Kingsburg, because they were like, you're the Riffle family. Like, that doesn't happen. That's not supposed to happen. I confronted my dad that day. He knew the Bible much better than I. I said, Dad, you're kind of blowing my trust here. The only thing I know to do, because of my leadership roles and things that I'm doing, and where my faith's at, is I've got to trust Him more. I've got to trust Jesus more. And that's what I'm going to do. It was at that moment that I truly just turned to the Lord. I knew that most of the divorced kids around me were drinking and partying and doing drugs and all this other stuff, and I was like, that's not going to be me. I'm not going to go down that road. I know what that road looks like. I cared for people. But that day I committed to serve the Lord at a whole deeper level. Decided to take care of my mom and my brother, and it was time that I began to transition in ministry. I was one of those fun youth leaders that was working with kids all the time, junior high, high school, doing Mexico stuff, all these great things. But I think it was at that time, as I was sitting thinking through some of this, what I would share is that was when I started spending more time with hurting and broken people. Giving my time, talent, and treasure to those that are hurting and broken. To be honest, I felt disqualified from dating girls from healthy families. Saying that in those days, it was saying that they didn't want a kid coming from a broken home dating their daughter. There was just this kind of thing that was going on. You don't want that. It was shortly after they separated that Lorinda and I reconnected. She was going to Fresno Christian. I was going to Kingsburg. Our churches, Kerman Covenant, Kingsburg Covenant, would do things together as youth ministries, and we reconnected. Her family knew my family well. And her family was gracious and loving to me, knowing that I was broken. I feel like I've known them just as long as I've known my own parents. They knew my family, but they also knew my heart for people. I was blessed by them. I still am to this day. We dated over the next 2 years. We'd both been attending Kings River Community College in 2 years. And after 2 years, she started attending Fresno Pacific. I headed to Multnomah Bible College. With my ministry and leadership background, when I got up to Multnomah to Bible college, I was like, you know what? I really love what's going on here, and I would love to be the student body president at some point in time. That was kind of like one of my aspirations. I had met, when I was on a tour, met with the student body president at the time on a tour a couple years before, and 2 years later, actually my second year later, I was able to do that. Got voted in to do that. And it was a great opportunity at the time. Had the ability and moments to spend time with Luis Palau, because he came out of Multnomah Bible College. And so he would come and hop on campus from time to time. Billy Graham came into town. We did a big conference when he was there, big crusade up there. And then Steve Farrar. Steve Farrar was, many of you know, men's ministry guy, been around for years. And that guy was, in fact, I'm reading a book with one of the guys that's a donor that I'm investing my time in. And one of his books called Finishing Strong. And so I'm right in the middle of that book right now with this other gentleman. In 1992, I reconnected with Lorinda, and we were being called to get married. We had dated for 2.5 years, and we ended up getting married here at the Christian Reformed Church in Fresno on what we thought was a day where it was 110 degrees, August 8th. But I also Googled that, and it was 96 that day. It just felt like 110 because you're in a tux. So, but we ended up getting married, and like Dan shared, we've been married for, this will be our 31st year. And I always thought, when I was growing up, where it talks about generational sin in the Bible, you know? And it keeps impacting people and impacting people and impacting people. And I was like, I'm going to break that. Because I don't want to see my kids going through divorces and all that. I got to try to figure out how to break this. I need to stay strong. I need to stay committed to the Lord. I need to continue to love my wife. Learned I went into teaching in Kerman. I went to a manufacturing company in Kerman and did that for 2 years. And then I dropped to my knees behind a metal rack one day because I was feeling like the Lord was calling me to do something more. And here I'm leading this team of guys, all non-believers, asking me to do prayer meetings with them at 7 in the morning because I loved these guys and they loved me. And it was in those years that when I dropped to my knees, I lifted my hands over the top of Kerman. I said, Lord, if you want me to do something more for you than working at this manufacturing company, I just pray that you would open the doors for that. I didn't tell anybody, but 2 months later, and I was volunteering in youth ministry there at Kerman Covenant Church, and it was the executive, the chairman of the board comes up to me and he says, hey, Brent, our youth pastor just resigned. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm volunteering for him. What are you talking about? He resigned. No, he just resigned. And so we're wondering if you would be open to taking this role of youth ministry in Kerman. And I said, you don't even know what I prayed 2 months ago, but I was just praying about this, seeing what the Lord had in mind. And those doors opened. I served there for 10 years. Learned a teaching. She was in elementary all the way up to 6th grade, and I had 7th, 8th, and all the way up to college. So we had the full gamut of access to kids, campuses, whatever. And in those days, it was really, really great because we had access to everything. We built trust. In 2003, the Lord put pieces together into the financial services industry. I wondered, Lord, why are you calling me to the financial services industry? This sounds really weird. Like I'm going from youth ministry to financial services. I love people. I love to help them be on mission. I love to see what God's going to do with their financial world. But why are you doing this? And I reflected back on when I went to Bible college. I didn't go to Bible college to go into ministry. I really went to Bible college to use my biblical knowledge and biblical foundation to be able to impact the lives of people wherever I go and whatever I do. And really, I was thinking it was going to be in the corporate world. And ended up using it in some of the manufacturing piece, but then also in youth ministry, but later to see God do some incredible things. You know, getting involved in investing in people's lives, we're able to see God do some amazing things. I remember one day where my boss, or my manager, said, would you share this book with that I was reading? It was called The Dream Giver by Bruce Wilkinson. Would you share this book with the rest of the agents? And I'm like, I don't want to, if I share this book, I'm going to have to share the gospel. And if I'm going to share the gospel, I'm going to be doing a bunch of people that don't know the gospel. And I don't know how this is really going to go down. This is a corporate world, right? So is that really what you want me to do? He goes, if the Lord's telling you to do it, I'm open for you to do it. I said, awesome, I'm in. Let's do it. One of the things that we think about in being generous with our time, with our talents, with our treasure, and sometimes it's going to be taking some of our words. How do we be generous with some of our words? We may not have the treasure at the time, but we may have words. We may have our talents. And so that day, as I shared, 2 Hmong people come up to me. And they go, what you just shared, we want to know more about that. And it was this one guy, To Her is his name. And he comes up to me, he goes, Brent, I need to meet with you. And it's broken English, and he's about this tall. and he goes, I want to know more about what you share. I said, I'd love to. Can we meet in the conference room? So we go down, we meet in the conference room a couple days later, and the one passage that I was praying, going, Lord, what do I do with this? I says, if you come to Jesus, because that's what he was asking me, I feel like God wants me to come to him. And I says, he does. but if you come to Christ right now, what's going to happen? And he goes, my family's going to excommunicate me. I'm not going to, they're not going to want this. And it's one of those moments where you go, oh, great, you should come to Christ. It'll be great. And at that time, I says, Lord, you need to give me the passage of Scripture to share with him. And the passage came immediately. I hand my Bible over to him, and he starts reading. Where Peter was sitting in the boat, and he's sitting there, and he calls out to Jesus on the water. And Jesus says, come out. Come to me. Come out. Come out under the water. And I stopped him, and I said, where are you at in the story? And he goes, I'm in the boat. And Jesus is calling me out onto the water. And I said, awesome, then what are you going to do? I've got to get out of the boat. And so that day, he accepted Christ. I said, here's what I believe. I believe God is going to use you to be a light in your family. He's going to empower you to change things in your world. He's going to call you to be generous with love to your family, to show them who Jesus is. And that's exactly what happened. Not quite a year later, 27 Hmong people are meeting in our home every week for 2 years. Lauren and I had no idea what Hmong food was. It was awesome, man. We loved it. It was great because they brought food every time. They were generous. We kept coaching and encouraging them, and they launched Freedom Community Church. And it was this last December 8th that they invited us to come. And they says, we want you to come to our service again. This is your spiritual family. And it took me back to the days when my grandparents were so generous to people. The culture didn't matter because everybody needed the love of Jesus. From the financial services industry, I went to Clovis Hills for a couple years. And it was one day that I received a phone call from the lady who was my boss in the manufacturing company. And it was her and her husband, Joe. And she says, Brent, I think you need to go and connect with Joe. He's at Hines Hospice on Palm and Shaw area. Would you go visit him? I think it's time you need to go visit him. And so I went on that day, and knowing that at 57 years old, he gave his life to the Lord. He didn't know how to read, but it was the second or third year when I met him after he came to Christ that we're sitting in the office, and he goes, I need you to share your story, your testimony. As I'm sharing my very bland testimony of not being in jail, not being on drugs and all this stuff, but just this heart for God most of my life, he just started weeping in his office. And he said, that's the most incredible testimony I've ever heard. And I said, no, Joe, yours is so much greater because you see where you've been and you see where God wants to take you. He and I spent a lot of time together. He was really frustrated when I left into youth ministry. But it was that day when I went to go visit Joe, and I grabbed his hand as he was laying there, and everybody says that hearing's the last to go. Dr. Martin, would you say it's the last to go? Hearing the last to go, right? See? So, I grabbed his hand, and I said, I just started praying. I said, Joe, I first shared with him, I said, Joe, I just want to thank you for all the things that you've done for me, for the encouragement you've given me, for telling me that I need to just keep diving into my faith, for blessing me even though you didn't want me to leave the manufacturing company, but you blessed me to go do ministry. Joe, you had a heart for the homeless. You had a heart for the drug addict. You had the heart for people that were lost and down and out in this community. And you went and served them. You loved them. You were in parks every weekend just giving everything you had to them because you understood what brokenness looked like and you wanted to bring hope to them. And so, Joe, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for showing me what love looks like, what compassion looks like, and what generosity looks like. And as I grabbed his hand, I just sensed the Lord telling me to do one thing. And I sensed the Lord saying, Brent, you need to be his living legacy. And I prayed for Joe at that moment, and I said, God, I pray that you would just bless Joe. I thank you for all that he's done. I pray that as he opens his eyes for the next time, he's going to see you, Jesus. But Joe, I'm committing today to you that I'm going to be your living legacy. Everything that you've done, your heart for people, your heart of compassion, your heart of generosity, I want to continue living that out. I walked away from him after praying, and I walked out, and I gathered later that on April 8th, 2008, 3 minutes after I left, he went to be with Jesus. I had no idea, but 4 months later, I would be working at the Fresno Rescue Mission and was there for 5 years, truly living out his legacy. Mentoring people, investing in people. I look at the times not only at the Fresno Rescue Mission of connecting people's heart to the things that they love to give to. That was really my mission. How do I connect people's heart to the things that break the heart of Jesus? To see them give in incredible ways. I started doing this with my kids. My daughter started a ministry called Kids on a Mission. Why? Because she said, I want to be able to help the kids in need at the rescue mission. At the age of 13, she started Kids on a Mission, and those kids raised over $750,000 in this community with thousands of other kids. Doing outreach projects, putting in the playground at Rescue the Children, doing housing projects in El Salvador, water projects in Africa and Haiti, watching God do incredible things. At Convoy of Hope, it was seeing God do even more incredible things, empowering women around the world, putting feeding programs in different areas, working with thousands of people all over the world. And so it's been a blessing taking 27 teams to Mexico. I've been on leadership teams of 12 international ministry trips, leadership teams, 6 times into Costa Rica and countries like Haiti, Kenya, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Seeing the lives of people transformed, not only in other parts of the world, but also right here in our backyard. When we kept looking at what was going on and the time that we were talking to people here in the valley, there were times and time again where we were referring people out of this area to work with community foundations, National Christian Foundation, other foundations all over the country, working with advisors, vetting organizations all over the valley. Last year we met with 160 executive leaders of ministries in this Central Valley just to understand what's going on. How can we make a bigger difference in the valley? How can we take these assets that have capital gains attached to them. And how can we take these assets and donate these assets into a local foundation that we can then take and retain those capital gain dollars that are attached to homes and real estate and everything else? And how can we take those tax dollars and move them into kingdom dollars? That's what started driving me to say, how can we help people do some of this? I kept seeing time and time again where people were moving their money out of our valley. And so what was the Lord doing? He was calling us to do something bigger, something greater here in the valley. Some of the calls and some of the conversations we've had now after 3 years of building this has been incredible, seeing God starting opening the doors to conversations of greater generosity. And so our heartbeat with the 10 Talents Foundation came after I left Convoy of Hope, and the Lord called me into something greater for the valley, is how do we make a greater kingdom impact, and how do we mobilize a movement of generosity and make a greater difference in our valley, whether it be through our schools, through the hundreds of ministries, throughout the world. What's God calling us to? I'll leave with this one note, and it's a challenge to all of us. It's out of the book By Giving It All Away and Getting It All Back Again by David Green, the CEO and founder of Hobby Lobby. He says, at the core of any meaningful life and legacy has to be a vision for generosity, an understanding of what it means to be a blessing for others. The value of giving to church, to missions, to people must first be modeled, then taught so that the next generation embraces generosity as their calling. How are we going to take our heart for compassion and generosity and move it into the next generation? What does that look like for each of us? How do we make an impact in people's lives in that way? It could be through our time. It can be through our talents. It can be through our words, where we're sharing Christ with someone. Or it can be by giving our treasure. We have the greatest opportunity today, especially with our words and with our compassion, with our generosity, to make a significant difference in the lives of people. This world is hurting, and the opportunities are huge. So I just challenge you. How are you imparting the heart of compassion and generosity to the next generation? It could be through your giving and getting your kids and grandkids involved, like some of the people that are a part of the foundation are doing. It could be just using your words and speaking words of encouragement to the next generation and empowering them to do something greater with their lives. What are we going to do? How are we going to lead that? God has a plan, and we need to keep investing. God bless you all, and thank you.